I refused to give my brother all of my money, so my mother branded me as selfish. So I showed her how selfish I can really be. My childhood is marked by one phrase, and one phrase only: stop being selfish. One time when I was 9, I set up a yard sale where I sold all of my old belongings and made almost $100. But when I announced it to my family at dinner, my mom just asked why I didn't give some of the money to my younger brother, who was 8 at the time. A feeling of guilt immediately washed over me, and I handed Trent $20. But instead of thanking me, he gave my mom a look. My mom then told me to stop being selfish, and I ended up giving him $80. On some level, I knew it wasn't right, but I did it anyway, because her approval mattered more to me than my feelings. Fast forward to last week, when I turned 27. For the first time in my life, I've achieved financial stability. I have a pretty solid savings account and a 401k, which might not sound like much, but to me, an ex-shopaholic, it's a very big deal. And of course, I didn't want to be selfish. So at the last family gathering, I came with a very big announcement. This Airbnb expert at my job was looking for someone to invest in a house renovation with him, and in exchange, they'd receive 10 times the amount in passive income every year for the rest of their lives. I could have signed up myself, but I wanted to give the opportunity to Trent. On the way there, I kept telling myself that this was the last key I needed to prove that, once and for all, I was not selfish. But of course, my hopes were shattered, because when I got to my mom's house, Trent opened the door. "Did Mom tell you my laptop broke a few months ago?" I stared at him blankly, and he just sighed. "Mom, I told you Maggie would forget to buy me a new MacBook." I heard footsteps, and suddenly my mom was beside him. They both stood with their arms crossed, and my mom told me that if I was going to be selfish and not buy my younger brother new things, then I didn't even deserve a nice job, car, or anything. And before I could explain why I came empty-handed and tell him about the Airbnb that would make him an extra $5,000 a year, he chimed in. "Maggie, I've always protected you at school. Remember the bullies?" I did remember, because he never let me forget. You see, in high school, I was tormented all day, every day. And one time my brother threatened them to stop, so they did. But it only lasted one day. Still, he raves about it to me and my mom, talking about it like he was a great Roman soldier. And I know this might sound pathetic, but I wasn't even angry. I just felt tears sting my eyes. My fingers clutched the brand new iPhone in my pocket that I had gotten for my mom. And as I was about to give it to them, they kept going. "You know your brother Trent just got fired from his role as cashier at the local Quick Check. 10 years of employment down the drain. How do you plan to support us during this?" In an instant, my sadness turned to anger. I stared at the entitled faces of my family. Not once during this whole ordeal was I invited inside. I thought about my friends' families that I had been introduced to, how they were always warmly greeted with a hug, never yelled at, never made to cry, never treated like the family slave. I took a deep breath and asked them if they had any gifts for me. My brother rolled his eyes. "It's always about you, isn't it, Maggie?" I kept a completely stoic expression while he retrieved it. The gift in question ended up being a discount coupon for a milkshake at Burger King. I'm lactose intolerant. Well, that was enough for me. I kept my gifts to myself and walked back towards my car. The second I turned the corner, I broke down. I thought back to all the times I gave into their BS demands, all the times I chose them instead of me. I think that moment was the first time I actually let myself feel angry. And for once, I wanted to do something about it. I turned the car around, left my mom's new iPhone in the car, and walked up the driveway. Again, Trent answered the door. "Glad you're done with your little temper tantrum. Now let me ask again, where are our gift?" "Hey, Trent," I interrupted. "Who pays for your phone bill?" "Mom's boyfriend," he answered. I knew he was confused. "What about your gas? Your health insurance? Who covers your weekend food deliveries? Or your premium coffee subscription?" The smirk was wiped from his face, and that's when my mom came. "Hey, Mom, who pays for your guy's rent? Who pays off the car insurance?" They both turned to look at each other and had the "oh wait" look plastered on their faces. You see, I had previously told Trent that my mom's boyfriend was covering his payments, because I knew that would help him like him more. And when my mom was on the verge of kicking out Trent, I told her Trent was paying off the bills. I didn't even stick around to explain. I just left. And even though I felt like a badass, it was still really hard. So I spent the entire night bawling my eyes out. And when I woke up, I noticed my phone had been bombarded with dozens of texts and missed calls. The first voicemail was angry. The second was threatening. By the 10th, they were practically begging to talk about this rationally. It was the first time I'd ever stood up to them. And while part of me wanted to savor the moment, the practical side of my brain was already calculating what this would mean financially. I'd been supporting their bills for years, paying for Trent's phone, health insurance, streaming services, and covering most of Mom's rent whenever she came up short. After a quick tally on my calculator app, I realized I'd been spending nearly $2,000 a month on them, money that could have gone toward my own future, or even that Airbnb investment. The calls kept coming throughout the day, and by evening, Mom's tone had shifted completely from angry to pitiful, claiming that they'd be evicted if I didn't fix this misunderstanding right away. I turned my phone on silent and went to bed early, waking up the next morning to 37 missed calls and a series of increasingly desperate texts about how the landlord was threatening them and utility companies were sending final notices. For a brief moment, I felt that familiar twinge of guilt and responsibility, my finger hovering over the call button as I considered giving in just one more time, but then I remembered the look on their faces when they'd demanded gifts while not even inviting me inside. I decided to take a personal day from work to clear my head, spending the morning reorganizing my finances and realizing with a shock that without supporting my family, I could actually afford to make that Airbnb investment myself. While I was crunching numbers, my coworker Jamie called to check on me since I rarely missed work, and when I explained the situation with my family, she invited me to lunch, saying I sounded like I needed a friendly ear. Over sandwiches at the cafe near my apartment, I found myself telling Jamie everything about the yard sale when I was 9, about high school, about how they'd treated me at my birthday visit, and with each revelation, her eyes grew wider until she finally put down her fork and said, "Maggie, that's not normal family behavior, that's financial abuse." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I spent the rest of lunch in a daze as Jamie gently explained that what I'd been experiencing wasn't just occasional selfishness, but a systematic pattern of exploitation that had been normalized for me since childhood. When I got home, I finally called my mom back, keeping my voice steady as I explained that I would no longer be covering any of their expenses. And when she started crying about how they'd end up homeless, I calmly suggested that Trent could get another job, or they could apply for assistance programs. Mom switched tactics immediately, her voice hardening as she accused me of abandoning family in their time of need, reminding me of all the sacrifices she'd made raising me. But this time her guilt trips bounced off me like raindrops on a windshield. I ended the call with a simple, "I love you both, but I can't keep doing this," and blocked their numbers for the rest of the week to give myself space to think. The next 2 weeks were the most peaceful of my adult life. I invested in that Airbnb opportunity, started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics, and even joined a local hiking group where I met some genuinely kind people who seemed to like me without expecting anything in return. 3 weeks after cutting off financial support, I received a letter from Trent that started with accusations, but eventually admitted they'd been kind of depending on me too much and asked if we could talk in person. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, rather than at their house or mine, and arrived early to secure a table in the corner where I could see them coming. Mom arrived first, looking noticeably more worn than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail rather than her usual perfect styling, and when Trent joined her a few minutes later, I noticed he was wearing a uniform from the local grocery store. The conversation started awkwardly, with Mom explaining that they'd been forced to make some drastic changes after I abandoned them, but I just sipped my coffee and waited for them to get to the point. Eventually, Trent admitted he'd taken a job stocking shelves overnight, and Mom had started babysitting for neighbors to make ends meet, but they were still behind on rent and facing possible eviction if they couldn't come up with $2,000 by the end of the week. I looked at them both for a long moment, remembering all the birthdays when my gifts had been an afterthought if I received anything at all, all the times I'd given up opportunities to pay for Trent's latest whim, all the years I'd been made to feel that my sole value was in what I could provide. "I can help you this one last time," I said finally, pulling out my checkbook, "but I have conditions." Their faces lit up with relief until I explained my terms. I would pay the $2,000 directly to their landlord, not to them, and in exchange, they would attend 3 family therapy sessions with me and my therapist. Mom immediately balked, claiming there was nothing wrong with our family dynamic that needed fixing by some stranger, but Trent, surprising me, nudged her arm and muttered, "It's just 3 sessions, Mom, and we need the money." I wrote the check on the spot, but made it clear this was the last financial assistance they would receive from me, unless there was a genuine emergency, and despite Mom's obvious displeasure, they both agreed to the therapy sessions. The first session was a disaster, with Mom spending the entire hour defending her parenting, and Trent alternatively backing her up and sulking, while I sat there feeling like I was 9 years old again. But my therapist Chen handled it masterfully, not pushing too hard, but also not letting Mom's revisionist history go unchallenged. The second session a week later went marginally better, with Trent actually admitting that maybe he had been a little entitled growing up, though Mom still insisted she'd only been trying to make sure I didn't become selfish like my father had been. By the third session, something had shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough that when Dr. Chen asked us to each share one thing we appreciated about the others, Mom actually said she was proud of how responsible I'd become with money, which might have been the first genuine compliment she'd given me in years. After completing the 3 mandatory sessions, I expected my family to disappear from therapy and my life again, but to my surprise, Trent called me the following week to ask if I'd be willing to meet him for coffee, just the 2 of us. We met at the same cafe, and for the first hour, we just made awkward small talk about his new job and my Airbnb investment, but eventually he cleared his throat and said, "Dr. Chen made me realize some stuff about how I treated you growing up. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak as he continued. I guess I just always saw you as the golden child who had everything figured out, and I was jealous. So when Mom would take my side, it felt good, you know? He looked uncomfortable but kept going. Anyway, I've been thinking about all the times you helped me out financially, and I want to pay you back. Not all at once, obviously, but maybe a little each month. I was so stunned I nearly spilled my coffee, assuring him that wasn't necessary, but he insisted, pulling out an envelope with $200 cash inside. It's a start, at least. Things with Mom remained more complicated. She attended one more therapy session on her own before declaring it unnecessary, but she did stop calling me for money, instead sending occasional text messages that were stiff but civil, asking about my work or sending photos of her garden. 6 months after our confrontation, my Airbnb investment started paying dividends, bringing in an extra $1,200 a month that I split between increasing my 401k contributions and a separate savings account earmarked for a down payment on my own home. I also started dating again after years of avoiding relationships out of fear that a partner would drain me financially the way my family had, and met Brandon, an elementary school art teacher who was as frugal as he was kind. Our first date stretched from coffee to dinner to a moonlit walk along the riverfront, talking about everything from childhood dreams to financial goals, and I found myself telling him about my family situation without the shame that had always accompanied those stories before. A year into our relationship, Brandon proposed during a weekend camping trip, pulling out a simple but beautiful ring after we'd hiked to a stunning viewpoint overlooking the valley. The wedding planning brought my family dynamics back into focus. Brandon's parents wanted to contribute generously to the ceremony, while my mom offered only criticism about my choices, and Trent asked if he could bring 3 different plus ones. I found myself slipping back into old patterns, trying to accommodate everyone else's wishes at the expense of my own, until Brandon gently reminded me that this was our day, not theirs, and we should plan the celebration we wanted. We opted for a small ceremony in a botanical garden with just 50 guests, and when I called to tell Mom about our decision, I braced myself for her disapproval. But to my surprise, she simply asked what she should wear, and if there was anything she could help with. The day before the wedding, Trent pulled me aside during the rehearsal dinner and handed me an envelope containing 15 crisp $100 bills, explaining that he'd been saving up to pay me back and wanted to give me this portion as a wedding gift. I hugged him for what might have been the first time in our adult lives, feeling something heal between us that I hadn't even realized was still broken. The wedding day itself was perfect in its imperfection. My veil caught on a rose bush during the processional. Brandon's nephew announced he needed to use the bathroom in the middle of our vows, and the catering company forgot the vegetarian entrees. But surrounded by genuine love and celebration, none of it mattered. My mom even surprised me by giving a toast that, while brief, acknowledged how proud she was of the life I'd built for myself. Brandon and I settled into married life with ease, merging our finances and our futures in ways that felt equal and respectful. And when I got pregnant a year later, we approached the news as a team, researching childcare options and adjusting our budget together. My relationship with my family continued to evolve slowly. Mom still occasionally made comments about my extravagant lifestyle when she visited our modest 3-bedroom home, and Trent sometimes forgot our birthdays or canceled plans last minute, but the old patterns of financial exploitation had been permanently broken. When our daughter Ellie was born, I watched my mother hold her granddaughter for the first time, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, and felt a complex mix of emotions: hope that my child would never experience the conditional love I'd grown up with, fear that I might unknowingly repeat patterns from my own childhood, and determination to create a different kind of family legacy. As Ellie grew from infant to toddler, I found myself hyper-aware of how I spoke to her about money and sharing, careful never to use the word selfish, even when she refused to share her toys with cousins or friends. Brandon noticed my anxiety around these situations and suggested we both read parenting books about healthy financial attitudes for children, which helped me see that teaching generosity didn't have to mean sacrificing self-worth. When Ellie turned 3, we started giving her a small allowance divided into 3 jars, one for spending, one for saving, and one for sharing, letting her decide how to use the sharing portion, whether for buying a gift for someone else or donating to the animal shelter she loved visiting. My mom questioned this approach during a Sunday dinner, asking why we were complicating things, instead of just teaching Ellie to share everything, but I calmly explained our philosophy while Brandon squeezed my hand supportively under the table. The true test came during Ellie's 5th birthday party, when Trent arrived without a gift, explaining sheepishly that he'd been laid off again and couldn't afford one. The old Maggie would have slipped him money later or pretended his presence was gift enough, but instead, I suggested he could give Ellie the gift of time, perhaps taking her to the park the following weekend, or teaching her to fish at the lake near his apartment. Trent seemed surprised but agreed, and that outing became a monthly tradition that benefited them both far more than any toy would would have. As our family grew with the addition of twin boys 2 years later, Brandon received an offer to become the art department head at a prestigious private school across the state, a significant promotion with better pay and benefits, but one that would mean moving away from my family. 10 years earlier, I would have turned it down immediately, convinced that my obligation to Mom and Trent outweighed any opportunity for our own family. But now I found myself genuinely weighing the pros and cons without that crushing sense of guilt. When I told Mom about the potential move over lunch, I expected resistance or emotional manipulation, but she surprised me by asking thoughtful questions about the schools in the new area and whether the cost of living was lower. She did get teary-eyed toward the end of our conversation, admitting she would miss seeing the grandkids regularly, but then suggested she could visit during school breaks, and we could set up weekly video calls. The move turned out to be exactly what our family needed. Brandon thrived in his new role. I found a part-time accounting position that allowed me flexibility with the children, and we purchased a home with a spare bedroom specifically designated for family visits. Mom came for a week each summer, and while those visits weren't always easy, she still had opinions about everything from how I loaded the dishwasher to which extracurricular activities the kids should pursue. The physical distance had created emotional boundaries that made our relationship healthier. Trent's life took an unexpected turn when he met Vanessa, a no-nonsense business owner who ran a successful landscaping company and needed an operations manager. Their relationship moved quickly from professional to personal, and I watched with a mix of amusement and awe as my formerly entitled brother transformed into someone who worked diligently and took pride in his contributions. When they got engaged after just 6 months of dating, Trent called to ask if I would be his best person at the wedding, explaining that I was the only one who had always been there for him, even when he hadn't deserved it. The ceremony was small and practical, held in Vanessa's beautifully landscaped backyard with catering from the local deli and decorations made by her crafty sister. During the reception, Trent pulled me aside to show me something on his phone, a savings account with my name listed as the beneficiary, containing over $12,000, which he explained was the full amount he'd calculated that I'd spent supporting him over the years, plus interest. I tried to refuse, telling him it wasn't necessary, but he insisted that completing this repayment was important for his own growth, saying, "Vanessa helped me understand that I can't truly start our life together until I've closed the debts from my past."